We live in an age of aggressive availability. Our phones, our mailboxes, and even our living rooms have become billboards for other people's agendas. We've been conditioned to believe that a full life is a busy one, that a good home is one filled with the trophies of our consumerism. But there is a quiet, radical rebellion happening among the wisest elders in Japan. It's called Danshari 2.0. It isn't about cleaning up, it's about the art of refusal. It is the realization that every object you allow into your home is a silent contract you've signed to give away a piece of your life force. Look around you for a moment, honestly. Most of what surrounds you is not neutral. It asks something from you, your time, your attention, your memory. And over the years, those small demands quietly stack up until they begin to feel like a kind of debt. Today, we're not talking about clearing space. We're talking about taking your life back. If something in you already feels this, stay with me. And if you value this kind of quiet clarity, subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. This is a place where we protect stillness in a world that constantly tries to take it. Now let's begin with the first step, refusing the version of yourself you thought you needed to become. The first pillar, Dan, is often explained as refusing, but not in the harsh sense of pushing things away. It is a quieter decision. It's the moment you realize that not everything you once invited in your life still belongs there. Many of the things we hold on to are tied to a future that never quite arrived. Not because we failed, but because life moved in a different direction. You might see it in small ways. A kitchen appliance you bought when you imagined having more time. A stack of books you once felt excited about. Supplies for hobbies that seemed important at one point, but slowly faded into the background. There's nothing wrong with any of these things. They came from good intentions, but over time, those intentions can turn into pressure. Every time you see them, there's a quiet reminder. Not loud enough to upset you, but present enough to linger. A sense that something is unfinished. Danshari 2.0 asks you to look at that honestly. Not with guilt and not with judgment, but with clarity. Because the weight you feel is not coming from the object itself. It's coming from what it represents. An expectation that is still sitting there, waiting. Dan is the point where you decide you're no longer going to carry that expectation, not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing to stop measuring your life against a version of yourself that no longer fits. And when you make that decision, even quietly, something shifts. The pressure eases. The room feels different, even if nothing has physically changed yet. You begin to understand that your life does not need to expand in every direction to be meaningful. It only needs to feel true to where you are now. There's a woman named Evelyn who lives in a quiet part of Vermont. Her home is warm and peaceful in the way many people imagine retirement should be. But when you spend time there, you start to notice something subtle. In her kitchen, there are shelves of cookbooks, beautiful ones, carefully chosen over the years. Some have notes tucked into them, small reminders of recipes she once planned to try. She used to picture herself spending slow afternoons cooking from those pages. It felt like something she would grow into, but life didn't quite move that way. Her energy changed, her routines shifted, and those afternoons never really arrived. The books stayed, not as tools, but as quiet reminders. In another room, there's a sewing machine, still in good condition, with fabric folded neatly beside it. At one point, it represented a version of her that made things with her hands, someone who had the time and focus to sit and create. But that version never fully became part of her daily life. And over time, something changed in how she felt around these things. They didn't inspire her anymore. They waited. And that waiting turned into a kind of weight she carried without realizing it. One afternoon, she stood there holding a piece of fabric she'd bought years ago. She tried to remember what she had planned to make, but the memory was gone. All that remained was the feeling that it had once mattered, and in that moment, she saw it clearly. She wasn't holding fabric. She was holding an expectation she had been carrying for years. So instead of asking herself when she would finally get to it, she asked a different question. What if she didn't? There was no dramatic reaction, just a quiet sense of relief that surprised her. It felt like setting something down that she hadn't realized she'd been holding for a very long time. What Evelyn experienced isn't just emotional, it has a physical side as well. The brain tends to hold on to unfinished intentions. Anything tied to, I'll do this later, stays active in the background, even when you're not thinking about it directly. Over time, these small, unfinished loops begin to add up. Each one takes a bit of mental energy to maintain. It's not enough to overwhelm you all at once, but it creates a steady kind of pressure that you carry throughout the day. This can affect how easily you focus, how quickly you make decisions, even how deeply you rest. Because on some level, your environment is constantly reminding your brain that there are things left undone. That quiet signal never fully switches off. This is why a space filled with good intentions can sometimes feel heavier than a space with very little in it. When Evelyn began to let go of a few of those items, not all at once, just gradually, she noticed something simple but important. Her mind felt less crowded. There was less pulling at her attention. The room didn't feel like it was asking anything from her anymore. It just existed. There's a point in life where something becomes clear, even if it's hard to admit. You are not going to become every version of yourself you once imagined. Some ideas will remain ideas. Some paths will stay unexplored. That doesn't mean something went wrong. It means your life took shape. Holding on to every possible version of yourself might feel like keeping your options open, but over time it becomes something else. It becomes weight, a constant comparison between who you are and who you think you should have been, and that comparison never really ends. Dan offers a different way of looking at it, and it invites you to stop carrying everything at once, to choose what truly belongs to your life now, and to let the rest fall away without turning it into a personal failure. There is a kind of quiet strength in that. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady. When you begin to live that way, something changes inside you. You stop feeling like you need to catch up to your own life. You begin to feel settled in it. And from that place, stillness doesn't feel empty. It feels right. The second pillar is Shaw, often translated as disposal, but in practice it has very little to do with simply removing things that are broken or no longer useful. What it really asks of you is much more personal because it deals with the things you continue to keep, not for their function, but for what they represent about who you once were. Over time, do objects begin to carry meaning far beyond their practical purpose? A desk is no longer just a place where work was done. It becomes a symbol of years of responsibility, structure, and relevance. Clothes are no longer just something you wear. They begin to reflect moments when you were expected somewhere, when your presence mattered in visible ways. Without consciously deciding to do so, many people gradually shape their surroundings into a kind of quiet statement that says, "This is who I was." There is a certain comfort in that, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. There is reassurance in being able to look at something and feel that your life had weight, that it had form, that it mattered in ways that could be seen and recognized. But alongside that comfort, there is also a cost that often goes unnoticed. Because when your space is filled with reminders of who you used to be, it can quietly make it more difficult to settle fully into who you are now. Shaw brings you to a question that is simple on the surface, but often difficult to sit with for long. Who are you if you are no longer surrounded by proof of who you used to be? The hesitation that follows that question is rarely about the objects themselves. It comes from something deeper, from the fear of losing recognition, identity, or a sense of place that once felt clear and stable. But what if those things were never truly stored in the objects to begin with? What if they have simply been resting there, taking up space, waiting for you to notice that they no longer need to be carried in that form? Arthur lives in a quiet suburban neighborhood, when in a home that has changed very little over the years. There is a room he still refers to as his office, even though its original purpose has long since passed. The desk is large and solid, positioned exactly where it has always been, and on its surface are items that once supported a daily rhythm. Documents, tools, small details that made sense when his days followed a certain structure. Now they sit in place without being used, not because they are needed, but because they belong to a version of his life that once felt clear and defined. In his closet, there are suits that are still in good condition, carefully maintained even though they are rarely worn. Each one is connected to a time when his presence was expected, when people relied on him, when his role in the world was easy to explain. And Arthur does not think about these things constantly, but their presence creates a quiet connection to the past that never fully loosens. He tells himself he keeps them just in case, as though there might be a moment when that version of life returns and everything will once again have the same shape it used to. But beneath that explanation, there is a simpler truth that is harder to admit. These objects reassure him that he was someone clearly defined, that his life had structure, and that he mattered in a way that could be seen and measured. One evening, he sat alone in that room long after the light had faded, and without the usual distractions, his attention settled on the desk in front of him. For the first time in a long while, he looked at it not as furniture, but as something he had been holding on to. What he noticed was not dramatic, but it was honest. He was tired, not from doing too much, but from holding on to something that no longer fit the shape of his life. As long as that room remained unchanged, a part of him felt responsible for maintaining what it represented, as though letting it go would mean letting go of something essential about himself. And in that quiet, a simple thought came to him, one that did not demand anything but gently shifted how he saw things. What if I don't need to prove this anymore? The question did not erase his past or diminish what he had built, but it allowed him to see that those things were still real, whether or not they were physically present around him. It suggested that his value did not need to be displayed in order to exist, and that perhaps he had been caring more than he needed to for a very long time. There is also a biological dimension to this experience, and understanding it can make the emotional weight easier to recognize. The brain forms strong associations between identity and environment, meaning that the things around you constantly reinforce how you see yourself. When those surroundings reflect a version of your life that no longer matches your present reality, a quiet tension begins to form. It is not the kind of tension that announces itself clearly, but it is steady enough to affect how you feel over time. Part of your mind continues to reference the past, while another part is trying to adjust to the present, and maintaining that gap requires energy. It influences how easily you relax, how clearly you think, and how naturally you move through your day. There is often an unspoken question running quietly in the background, one that is rarely acknowledged directly, but still shapes your experience. Am I still that person? When your environment continues to point back to who you were, it becomes more difficult to answer that question honestly, because you are constantly being reminded of a version of yourself that no longer fully applies. Letting go of those objects does not erase your history, but it does remove the need to keep comparing your present self to your past in a way that quietly drains your energy. When Arthur began to make small changes to that room, without rushing the process or forcing himself into sudden decisions, what he felt was not loss, but relief. The space did not feel empty. It felt open in a way that allowed him to exist without constantly measuring himself against who he used to be. There is a quiet fear that often sits beneath all of this, even if it is never spoken aloud. It is the fear that without these reminders, you might become less visible, less significant, or somehow less real. It can feel as though the objects are holding something important in place, and that without them, something essential might fade. But the truth is that those objects were never the source of your meaning. They were only reminders of it, and over time, those reminders can become substitutes that carry more weight than they were ever meant to hold. Shaw is not asking you to forget your past or to dismiss what you have lived through. It is asking you to stop carrying it in a way that keeps you tied to it unnecessarily. There is a difference between remembering your life and holding on to it so tightly that it limits your ability to move forward. When you begin to understand that difference, something shifts in a quiet but noticeable way. You stop needing your surroundings to explain who you are, and you no longer rely on visible proof to feel secure in your own identity. In that space, something simpler takes its place, a sense of self that does not depend on objects, that does not need to be displayed or confirmed from the outside. It exists on its own, steady and unforced, and with it comes a feeling that is often overlooked but deeply important, a sense of being at ease within yourself, without needing anything around you to prove that you belong there. The final pillar is RI, often described as separation, but not in the sense of withdrawing from life or distancing yourself from people. It is about creating a boundary around your attention, which in many ways has become the most overused and unprotected part of modern life. Today, the most persistent form of clutter is no longer physical. It does not sit on your shelves or fill your drawers. It follows you quietly through your phone, your television, and the endless stream of updates, opinions, and notifications that arrive without pause. Because it is so common, it rarely feels intrusive. It simply feels normal. But if you step back and observe it carefully, you begin to notice something. Very little of what fills your mind throughout the day is actually chosen with intention. It arrives, it occupies space, and then it leaves behind a kind of residue that is difficult to name but easy to feel. Is the decision to protect your inner space from that constant flow, not by rejecting the world entirely, but by becoming more deliberate about what you allow to remain with you. Margaret lives in a modest apartment in a busy part of the city. Her home itself is calm, almost understated, but her mind rarely reflects that same calm. From the moment she wakes up, there is already movement, not in her surroundings, but in her attention. Her phone is always within reach, and before she fully settles into the day, her focus has already shifted outward. Messages, headlines, small updates, bits of information that seem harmless on their own, but quickly begin to shape the rhythm of her thinking. She does not describe herself as overwhelmed. In fact, she would say she is simply keeping up, staying informed, staying connected. But there are small moments that interrupt that belief. Moments when she sits down intending to rest, only to feel a subtle restlessness that pulls her back toward her phone. Moments when silence feels slightly uncomfortable, as though something is missing. Moments when her mind feels full, even though nothing specific stands out. One evening, the power went out without warning. The apartment fell into a kind of stillness she had not experienced in years. There was no background noise, no notifications, No easy way to fill the space. At first, the silence felt unfamiliar, almost uneasy. But as time passed, her body began to settle in a way she had forgotten was possible. Her breathing slowed, her thoughts became less scattered, and the constant urge to check something simply faded. In that quiet, she noticed something important. There was nothing she needed to reach for, nothing she needed to respond to, and instead of feeling empty, the moment felt complete. It was not the presence of something that created that feeling. It was the absence of everything that had been quietly demanding her attention. There is a biological explanation for the shift, and it helps to understand it in simple terms. The brain responds to new information with small bursts of stimulation, which is why notifications and updates feel so compelling. Each one signals that something new has happened, something worth noticing. Over time, however, constant exposure to this pattern begins to change how the brain operates. It starts to expect regular input, and when that input slows down, the absence can feel uncomfortable at first. This is not because silence is unnatural, but because the system has adapted to noise. At the same time, the nervous system remains in a mild but continuous state of activation. It is not intense enough to feel like stress in an obvious way, but it is enough to prevent the body from fully relaxing. Sleep can become lighter, focus more fragmented, and the ability to sit in stillness without distraction begins to fade. Gently interrupts this pattern by reintroducing space, not by forcing disconnection, but by allowing moments where nothing is entering your awareness. Moments where your attention is not being pulled outward and your mind is given a chance to settle on its own. When Margaret began to create small boundaries, such as leaving her phone in another room for short periods or allowing herself to sit without reaching for anything, the change was gradual but noticeable. The restlessness did not disappear immediately, but it softened, and in its place came a sense of ease she had not felt in a long time. She realized that stillness had never been the problem. It had simply been covered for too long. There is a quiet belief that many people carry, often without realizing it, that if everything becomes too still, something important might be missing. That silence means emptiness, and that without constant input, there is nothing to hold on to. But if you look closely, the discomfort in stillness is rarely about the stillness itself. It is about what you have become used to. Invites you to see your inner world differently, not as a space that needs to be filled, but as something that deserves protection. Your attention is not an endless resource, and your peace is not something that maintains itself without care. When you begin to treat your inner space as a kind of sanctuary, your relationship with the world changes. You are no longer reacting to everything that reaches you. You begin to choose, quietly and deliberately, what stays and what does not. And that choice creates a different kind of stability, one that does not depend on constant activity or stimulation. When Dan, Shaw, and Rai begin to work together, the change is not dramatic, but it is unmistakable. Your home feels lighter because it is no longer carrying expectations that do not belong to your present life. Your mind feels calmer because there is less competing for your attention. And your sense of self becomes clearer because it is no longer tied to who you thought you had to be or who you used to be. At some point, you begin to notice a shift that is easy to overlook, but deeply important. You stop feeling like something is missing. You stop feeling the need to add, improve, or prove anything in order to feel complete. There is a quiet recognition that what is here, right now, is enough. Not as an idea, but as a felt experience. And that feeling does not come from having more. It comes from caring less, from choosing what remains, and from allowing everything else to fall away without turning it into a problem. This is not about stepping away from the world. It is about refusing what does not respect your peace. It is about understanding that your time, your attention, and your energy belong to you. And in that you have the right to decide how they are used. And when you begin to live with that awareness, life becomes simpler in a way that feels natural rather than forced. You move with more clarity, you rest more deeply, and you begin to experience a kind of calm that does not depend on circumstances. It is steady, quiet, and lasting. If this way of seeing things resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on what in your life is quietly asking more from you than it gives back. You don't need to change everything at once. Even a small decision to let go, to step back, or to create a little more space can begin to shift how you feel. And if you want more conversations like this, calm, honest, and grounded in what truly matters, subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. This is where we slow things down, think clearly, focus on what helps you live with more ease and intention. There is nothing you need to chase. What you are looking for may already be here, waiting in the space you choose to protect.